Rob was 64 years old, and he was in excellent shape, all because he spent his whole life in the fresh air, in harmony with nature. Every animal in the forest was under his careful watch, and everyone in the region knew that the area entrusted to the old man Rob was definitely in order. The man loved his family very much. He was ready to go to the end of the world to make his beautiful wife and little son happy. But Sandra was always annoyed at one thing or another. There were too many insects, or the wolves were scaring her by howling at night. "Honey, it's always like this in the countryside," Rob reassured his wife. "It's okay, you'll get used to it. Just take a look at the beautiful nature all around, the trees, the greenery, the clean river, and all the fish in it." "Why would I care about fish? I'm thinking about my son. There's no daycare here or good school. When Stephen gets older, we'll have to drive him to school nearly 50 miles each way," the woman replied. "But other parents manage somehow," Rob said peacefully. "We'll get used to it." "But I don't want to get used to such difficulties. There's no need for them when there's another kind of life." Sandra was getting more and more annoyed. "What do you mean another kind of life? We were born and raised here. We started our family here." The man was at a loss. "Here's what I mean. I'm moving to the city to live with my mom. She has a big house. Our kid will study in a normal school and go to all kinds of after-school activities. I want him to grow up to be a well-rounded person and not some villager." "What about me?" Rob exclaimed in disbelief. "You do as you wish. I'm tired of your rounds and head counts. You spend more time with your animals than with me. I shouldn't have married you. I always dreamed of getting out of this hole," Sandra replied harshly. Rob didn't say anything else to his wife. He silently watched her pack her bags and get little Stephen ready for the road. And then he watched the car drive away, taking away his son, who looked at his dad with eyes full of tears. Rob never saw the boy again, and then Sandra filed for divorce. Rob lived as a loner for the next 6 years, and then he fell in love with a local saleswoman, Jacqueline, who was single. Her husband left her because she couldn't have children. The woman also fell in love with Rob and made an excellent wife. Ever since then, they lived together in perfect harmony. For nearly 20 years, they understood each other perfectly. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, Jacqueline died. Her heart started acting out, and then she had a heart attack. Thus, Rob was left all alone once again in his old age. But he still had the strength to work. He seemed to get energized by nature. The men even joked about it. "Rob, it looks like you'll even teach our great-grandchildren to love and respect nature." "That I will," the man answered jokingly. "Everything in this world loves order. I won't allow anyone to interfere in nature's business." The local hunters have always respected the old forester. He was a truly wise and fair man, and so poachers rarely dared to go into his territory. "Old man Rob, where is your faithful gray friend?" asked one of his friends. "We haven't seen him in a long time. He stops by once in a while. Just recently, he brought me a huge hare." The man spread his hands, showing the size of the prey. "Has he ever brought you a boar?" one of the men asked with a laugh. "No, boars are not his type of prey," Rob joked in response. Then the men started talking about the wolf, which the old man had saved 2 years ago. It was just after Jacqueline's death. Rob was walking down one of the forest paths when he came across a huge gray predator. Some poachers decided to set traps in the forest, and the unfortunate gray wolf got into one. His left paw was stuck in the metal trap, and the animal couldn't escape. Moreover, when the trap closed, it tore the wolf's skin and muscles. The animal was bleeding and getting exhausted. He didn't even twitch when the man approached him, only glanced at him with sad eyes. The man stood there for a second, thinking about what he could do. The wolf didn't cause anyone trouble. On the contrary, it was people who were the cause of his suffering. So there was no reason to kill him. Sure, a single shot could have ended the animal's pain, since the trap had already gotten to the bone and was only making the wound worse. But there was another option. "If you want to live, my friend, you'll have to be patient," Rob ordered the wolf as he sat down by the trap. The wolf only closed his eyes. He was completely out of strength. And even when the old man armed himself with a strong branch and started unclenching the trap, The predator only moaned quietly and desperately twitched his free front paw. The forester tightly bandaged the wound. Fortunately, Rob always had his first aid kit on him. He even managed to give the animal an injection of antibiotics. The old man poured water into the pot, put some bread in it, and returned to the village. He did what he could. The next day, Rob came back to the spot where he left the animal and found him already sitting there. Seeing the forester, the wolf got alert at first, but then recognized him and lay down on the ground, refusing to move. The old man sat down next to him, but the predator still didn't move. The man touched the patient's paws, and the wolf didn't even think of defending himself. At his own peril, Rob took off the bandage, applied some healing ointment to the wound, added some more water to the pot, and left a couple of pieces of meat. Then he walked away. The old man slowly walked between the trees when suddenly he heard footsteps behind him. His new friend was following Rob. "What are you doing?" the forester asked, surprised. "Do you want to come with me?" "Well, let's go, if you mean it." Thus, they came to the forester's house. The wolf immediately hid in the barn. The forester realized that the predator trusted him completely. It even brought tears to the old man's eyes. Well, that's surprising for a wolf. The forest predator? The villagers quickly learned about the forester's new tenant, but they were very restrained about it because they trusted the old man, while the forester believed that the animal would get stronger and go back into the forest. But that wasn't the case, and so they started living together. Rob went on his rounds of the forest while his gray friend guarded the yard like a dog, faithfully waiting for his master. One day, after he was returning home from the forest, the old man saw some strangers standing near his yard. Coming closer, Rob's heart sank. In front of him stood a man who looked exactly like him in his youth. And he had a pregnant woman with him. "Hey, Dad, I finally found you." The stranger rushed to hug Rob. "Mom told me that you left us and that you were dead, but I didn't believe her. I kept looking for you. You can't even imagine what it took me. Meet Lucy, my wife, and in 2 months, you'll become a grandfather." To say that Rob was shocked would be an understatement, but there was no doubt it was his son Stephen who was standing in front of the gray-haired old man. He hadn't seen him for over half of his life. They all went into the house together and chatted over some tea until late at night. They had so much to tell each other, so much to remember. By the way, the introduction of the guests to the wolf went great. The gray animal sniffed the strangers at first, looked closely at them, and then allowed them to scratch him behind the ear. The young people decided to stay with Rob for a little while. Stephen was working remotely, and Lucy could benefit from all the fresh forest air. The old man really loved this idea. Finally, his house was filled with cheerful conversations by the fireplace, and the kitchen always smelled of fresh pastries. His daughter-in-law turned out to be not only beautiful, but also a great chef. Once in a while, Stephen went on the forest rounds with his father. The man fell in love with the picturesque nature, enjoyed listening to his dad's stories, and learned what it meant to be a forester. The local wolf was always the silent witness to their conversations, as he followed the two everywhere. It seemed that nothing could spoil this perfect family time until something terrible happened. Lucy was making dinner for her men. The woman lit the stove and lay down to rest. Unfortunately, she forgot to open the damper, causing carbon monoxide to quickly fill the room. When Stephen returned home with his father, he found his pregnant wife unconscious. "It's all my fault," the old man Rob reproached himself. "Why did I take you with me? If you just stayed home, none of this would have happened. I asked her not to handle the stove on her own, but she didn't listen. What's going to happen now? Lucy, dear, please don't die," Stephen screamed, hugging his wife's lifeless body. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but it was too late. The doctor said that there was nothing he could do. The heartbroken son and father sobbed from their inability to change anything, and only the gray predator couldn't move away from Lucy. He kept licking her palms in the hope that the woman would wake up. Furious from grief, Stephen drove the wolf outside of the house and put him on a chain. The animal kept howling all night long as if he had gone crazy. And on the day of the funeral, he did whatever he could to try and break off the chain. Rob felt that his gray friend should be released. because he never acted like that without a good reason. And as soon as the old man took the animal off the chain, he rushed towards the cemetery. Stephen and Rob followed him. When the men approached the freshly dug grave, they froze in shock. The wolf was digging the ground. Realizing that the wolf wouldn't do it if he didn't have a good reason, the men started helping him with shovels, digging until their hands bled. A few minutes later, they heard a quiet moan of the unfortunate woman and managed to get her out. It was a real miracle, but Lucy was alive, and another little heart inside her continued to beat weakly. There was no limit to the surprise of the doctors who declared Lucy dead after failing to find her pulse. The woman and her baby were saved, and it was all thanks to the wolf's instincts. That summer, Rob celebrated his birthday like never before, in the circle of his close family, and the birth of a healthy grandson was the best gift for him. It's so great that this story ended well. It shows how important it is to have a good friend with a big heart, even if it's a wolf.